months since I read this again, since I last, read this. So sorry. This book deserves way better than that. Um, honestly, I got intimidated by this long ass chapter. I ain't gonna lie. But I started reading it and I was like, why did I stop? Like, it's so good. It's so good. So if you recall, we left off about talking about how could people organize horizontally possibly overcome the state. And so he went and started. I kind of got lost. I'm not gonna lie with this Machnovist and all this other stuff, the German things uh, and across Europe and stuff like that. I understand why it's important, but it still kind of lost me. Um, but as I kept reading, finally, like last week or a couple of days ago, they have too. Even the examples with the Macnovis was pretty interesting. We started talking about like the Lakota, like and how many of the indigenous kind of struggles against the U.S. are have been actually pretty successful, and the ways that they've fallen was not due to superior arms or anything like that, but was mostly due to like like yeah, this one part about like drugs and how they would, how they would put in disease, basically bio warfare stuff like that, in these areas. And then only times they were really beaten with a larger fighting force, which was when we're like 1,000 to 1, right? In terms of like the ratio, I forgot exactly where he puts it. Not just here; it was somewhere else. But like the U.S. Army had to have like hundreds of people for every Native American warrior and things like that, due to how these warriors had a very first of all their way of organizing was very efficient and very powerful, in which people organized behind warriors that they felt like was good at battle, right? And so was good at command, at leadership, and things like that. So it was completely voluntary. It wasn't some sort of coercion or manipulation like a lot of the U.S. military uses. Um, uh, and furthermore, they had used a lot of different tactics to overcome them. Were able to people coming in. Sorry, my dog. They were able to bring in other people who felt for them for their causes and things like that, and this continued to this day. 1990s onwards, all the way to the 2000s, right? So it still is continuing. They're still protesting and able to carve out their own lands. Like even here in America, many of us know that Native Americans, many of them have their own land that's technically autonomous from the U.S. State. So it shows that it is possible, right? It's not perfect. It is, there's a lot of difficulties involved, but it's still possible, right? And that should give us something to think about as well. Then he talked about, the folks in South America, across Mexico and these other places, Bolivia and things like that. That was another great one. Um, Talked about how they were able to go against the World Bank. There was a lot of great aspects here. He even talked about this one in Hamburg where there's like a squatters movement that happened in the 80s, and they're still basically there to this day. Now they're like their own co-op, and everything like that. So once again, shows you it's very much possible. It's very much still happening to this day. So we shouldn't, be like, oh, it's not possible. Oh, they're just too powerful or whatever, because that's just not true. So yeah, it was great finally getting back into this. So I do want to finish this on the stream. I stopped around here, and then we're going to finish to the end of this section, and hopefully we'll do this more consistently and finish the book. All right, because I do have another book. I bought his other book that I haven't touched yet because I do want to read it here. But the solutions are already here by Peter Yellerloo. So I want to read that next. Um, Very excited to get into that. Very excited. But I do want to finish this, because this is a good book. And I do like, kind of learning about this stuff here. And I hope other people can learn as well. So further ado, let's get into this. Um, In Copenhagen, Denmark, the autonomous youth movement went on the attack in 1986. At a time of militant squatting actions and sabotage attacks on Shell oil stations and other targets of anti-imperialist struggle, several hundred people rerouted their protest march by surprise and occupied Reisgate, a street in the neighborhood of Osterbro. They built barricades and won neighborhood support and brought groceries to elderly neighbors blocked in by the barricades. For 9 days, the Autonomen held the streets, defeating the police in several major battles. And the Autonomen is what they call the folks in Hamburg, who are squatting in that area, or the folks, I guess not just in Hamburg, but in that general vicinity, who are like squatting in these abandoned buildings and locations and things like that. Um, Free radio stations throughout Denmark helped mobilize support, including food and supplies. Finally, the government announced it would bring in the military to clear the barricades. The youth at the barricades announced a press conference, but when the appointed morning came, they had all disappeared. Two sitting negotiators wondered, where did the Beziers or occupation brigaders go when they left? What did the town hall learn? It seems the act can start all over again anywhere, at any time, even bigger with the same participants. Interesting. So this is talking about like specifically the youth. It was like a youth revolution, youth liberation revolution. But yeah, awesome. In 2002, Barcelona police attempted to evict Can Masdu, a large squatted social center on a mountainside just outside the city. Can Masdu was connected to the squatters movement, the environmental movement, and the local tradition of resistance. The surrounding hillside was covered in gardens, many of them used by older neighbors who remembered the dictatorship and the struggle against it, and understood that this struggle still continued in the present day despite the veneer of democracy. Accordingly, the center received support from many corners of society. When the police came, the residents barricaded and locked down. Let me just highlight the whole thing. And for days, 11 people hung in harnesses on the outside of the building, dangling over the hillside, high above the ground. Supporters streamed in and challenged the police. Others took action throughout the city, blocking traffic and attacking banks, real estate offices, real estate office, a McDonald's, and other stores. Police tried to starve out the ones hanging from the building and used psychological torture tactics against them, but ultimately failed. The resistance defeated the eviction attempt, and the autonomous zone survives to this day with active community gardens and a social center. Wow. See, this is what I'm talking about, right? We talk about all the time, oh, can't possibly work against a superior force and this, that, and the other. But here, here we go, right? um, can I wonder if they still here in 2020? Let's see. Let's see. In troubling times. I was not sharing my oh yeah, they are. Stop sharing. Gotta share my whole screen. Here we go. Here we go. Squatter Social Center, Residence Community Garden, College Park. 53 years. Yeah, so the area was abandoned for 53 years and they took over it. So they got videos from 2015 of them still doing stuff. Probably still there to this day. That's amazing. Wow. That's amazing. I'll have to look more into this. Um, okay. Was I here? I think I finished this. Yeah, okay. On December 6, 2008, Greek police shot to death the 15-year-old anarchist Alexis Grigoropoulos in the middle of Exarchia, the anarchist and autonomous stronghold in downtown Athens. Within minutes, anarchist affinity groups communicating by internet and cell phone sprang into action across the country. These affinity groups, in their hundreds, had developed relationships of trust and security and the capacity for taking offensive action over the previous years as they organized and carried out numerous small scale attacks on state and capital. These attacks included simple graffiti actions, popular expropriations from supermarkets, Molotov attacks on police, police cars, and commissaries, and bomb attacks against the vehicle and offices of political parties, institutions, and corporations that had led to the reaction against social movements, immigrants, workers, prisoners, and others. The continuity of actions created a background of fierce resistance that could come to the force when Greek society was ready. Their rage over the murder of Alexis provided a rallying point for the anarchists, and they began attacking police all over the country before the police in many cities even knew what was happening. The force of the attack broke the illusion of social peace, and in subsequent days, hundreds of thousands of other people came out into the streets to vent the rage they too harbored against the system. Immigrants, students, high school kids, workers, revolutionaries from the previous generation, old folks, all of Greek society came out and participated in a diversity of actions. They fought against the police and won, winning the power to transform their cities. Luxury shops and government buildings were smashed and burned to the ground. Schools, radio stations, theaters, and other buildings were occupied. Their mourning turned into celebration as people set fires and commemorated the burning of the old world with parties in the streets. The police responded in force, injuring and arresting hundreds of people and filling the air with tear gas. The people defended themselves with more fires, burning down everything they hated and producing thick clouds of black smoke that neutralized the tear gas. Wow. Let me drink some water. And what I find so interesting about this and so concerning, really, is that this is something that we have to really think about to this day. Like hearing what's going on in America, there's a huge amount of unrest, right, on every side of the political spectrum, because people are restless. Like people know that something is wrong, something's not going right, and life doesn't feel good, right? Most people are struggling, paying bills, and trying to just live a life, right? Eat good food, freaking find love, all simple things that we claim our society is so good at, right? We have all these conveniences, all these technologies, all this money, and yet the vast majority of people, oh, I don't know why you're trying to cut me out, internet. But yeah, the vast majority of people, even in America, and which is supposed to be, the best nation and all this other stuff, are miserable, right? Why are so many people so miserable if this is supposed to be, the best country ever or the most developed and things like that, right? To me, it shows that consumerism, right? Capitalism, that these products, these quote unquote innovations that we're so proud of are not adequate, right? They do not satisfy what we need as people, as human beings, as a species on this earth to enjoy our lives, right? If our very livelihood constantly feels threatened by the economy and inflation and politics and this that and the other, then what's the point of all this innovation, right? What's the point of all this quote unquote technology or economic development if most of us feel stuck? If most of us feel like we can't actually accomplish our dreams or live the lives that we want to live, right? And all of this untapped anger and anxiety and depression and all this stuff is just festering, right? And at the same time you have climate change, you have inflation, you have wars. So it's bound to bubble up into something very, very wild, right? And I hope that people can come together under, you know, a good philosophical and societal understanding of what the world can look like. This is why I'm reading this once again, right? It's because people want a better world, right? But they don't know how to get there. And so a lot of people are finding solace in these radical extremist groups in which pretty much have no actual good philosophies or no historical precedents, or at least no positive historical precedents, right? They have no examples of good communities being built, right? But while anarchists, you have a huge history of successful beautiful communities being built out, right? Of successful battles against these overlords and things like that, right? You have all these examples here. So like when things inevitably boil out, where are people going to go? What knowledge are people going to use in order to build that better life? I hope it's going to be this, because I really worry that if it's not this, it's going to be something really, really, really terrible. But let's continue. On the days when people started to go home, perhaps to return to normality, the anarchists kept the riots going so that there could be no doubt that the streets belonged to the people and a new world was within their reach. Amidst all the graffiti that appeared on the walls was a promise. We are an image from the future. Ooh. Excuse me. The riots went on for 2 weeks straight. The police had long lost all semblance of control and had run out of tear gas. In the end, people went home out of sheer physical exhaustion, but they did not stop. Attacks continued, and huge parts of Greek society began participating in creative actions as well. Greek society has been transformed. All of these symbols of capitalism and government were proven to provoke the scorn of the masses. The state had lost its legitimacy, and the media was reduced to repeating the transparent lie. These rioters simply don't know what they want. The anarchist movement won respect throughout the country and inspired the new generation. The riots subsided, but the actions continued. As of this writing, people throughout Greece continue occupying buildings, starting social centers, protesting, attacking, evaluating their strategies, and holding massive assemblies to determine the direction of their struggle. Democratic states still entertain the option of calling in the military when their police forces cannot maintain order. Hmm. Think about that for a second. And occasionally do so in even the most progressive countries. But this choice opens dangerous possibilities as well. The dissidents may also take up arms. If the struggle continues to gain popularity, more and more people will see the government as an occupying force. And in extreme case, the military may mutiny and the struggle spread. In Greece, were circulating letters promising that if they were called in to crush the revolt, they would give their arms to the people and open fire on the cops. Military intervention is an unavoidable stage of any struggle to overthrow the state. But if social movements can demonstrate the courage and organizational capacity to defeat the police, they may be able to defeat the military or win them over. Thanks to the rhetoric of democratic governments, soldiers today are much less prepared psychologically to repress local uprisings as brutally as they would in a foreign country. That's a good point, right? That's the thing about the kind of the double-sidedness of democracy. Of You claim that you're for the people, right? But when people, especially the forces that you're using to say, "Oh, I'm for the people," when they realize that you're actually not for the people, then the very force that you're using can and will, rebel against you, right? Um, and that's something that a lot of, I think, military folks should really think about as they're in the army. It's like you claim you're out there doing stuff for democracy, but we know for a fact that the vast majority of U.S. Kind of interventions are against those people who are trying to build their own democracies. Right? We have this history. We can look into the CIA. We can look into all these military operations, and we see even in the early 2000s, of course, with the Middle East and all that stuff. The um, uh, goodness, it's cutting out on me. But yeah, the vast majority of it was to gain oil. Right? Was a monetary thing. It was not nothing about democracy. And even to this day, what's going on in Israel and Palestine? Right? You got all these people clamoring for Israel when when they have been shown to be in um, an aggressive, kind of anti-democratic force. So like it is really you really see what's what, right? When when the fighting breaks out of who really cares about the democracy. Let's continue. Because of the globally integrated nature of the system, states and other institutions of power are mutually reinforcing and thus stronger up to a certain point. But beyond that point, they are all weaker and vulnerable to collapse on a global scale like never before in history. Political crisis in China could destroy the US economy and send other dominoes falling as well. Exactly. We have not yet reached the point at which we can overthrow the global power structure, but it is significant that in specific contests, the state is often unable to crush us, and bubbles of autonomy exist alongside the system that purports to the universal and without all alternatives. Governments are overthrown every year. The system has still not been abolished because the victors of such struggles have always been co opted and reincorporated into global capitalism. But if explicitly and anti authoritarian movements can take the initiative in popular resistance, this is hopeful. This is a hopeful sign for the future. Yeah. This goes to show that you can't just overpower and gain control, right? You also have to build a better system that is like, no, we're not going to play by the capitalist games and things like that. You like these other folks are doing, build a co-op, build a an autonomous zone in which you're not just there just to be rebels or whatever, but you're actually building a community where you can grow your own food. You can have your own intrinsic community, your own intrinsic economy, right? You can build your own housing. You can build your own systems of, everything from entertainment to, structures and buildings and architecture and things like that. So once we people realize that, I think you're going to see a lot more of these, autonomous zones pop up and stay up, right? That's not just, once again, just a place for, rebels, but a place where you can actually have a sense of community where people are building things together, right? As you see, um, a lot of these, pop up, I just think is going to be, is going to make the dominoes fall. And again, it's scary because it's going to happen either way. The question is how ordered is going to be, right? How organized is it going to be, right? Climate change is really going to cause a huge amount of unrest. It's already causing stuff, right? And as it gets worse and worse, you see more and more disasters. People are going to see that the local governments, their local governments and military structures or whatever, are not sufficient to protect them, are not sufficient to help them. And so people are going to look for alternatives. So if those alternatives are, the question is, are those alternatives are going to be organized and, stand on this history of, what works, or are they going to be just whatever people come up with, like fascistic type of stuff? So yeah, we'll end it there. I will be more consistent with this stuff, and we'll start back with talking about evolution. How do we know revolutionaries won't become new authorities? And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this stuff, what you agree with, disagree with, whatever. And let's keep learning together. Have a great day. See you.